The nature of hands. Dear Diary, today I am writing you under a rather extraordinary set of circumstances. I recognize what I write may soon be washed away by the abstract and impermanent way objects are treated in this realm, but since this is only a diary entry, it should not matter much. I started this day, if it may even be called that, in the company of several young children, each at least 15 years younger than me, if I were to wager a guess. We stood clumped around a chalkboard on the beach and decomposing remains of an old ship. The wood was moist and rich with mold and fungus. The kids didn't seem to mind. I saw a little boy on his hands and knees inspecting the rotten wood. He tore off a chunk and flew it around his head like an airplane. I turned my attention to the blackboard. Amidst the sketches of whale skeletons and nerve paths, I saw a name written in small bold letters. Professor Stan. I panned my eyes a touch and caught sight of a towering man, at least I think he was a man. The blackboard, almost my height, only came up to his waist. He donned a vibrant rogue dress, and adorning his lips was glittering neon lipstick. I should perhaps call such a thing lipstick, if the feeling in the pit of my stomach was any indication. The man held a long, pitch-black baton, which he waved haphazardly toward the chalkboard at regular intervals. I wondered what kind of reputable professor would think to set up class in the middle of a mildewing shipwreck. I did not dare to ask the professor this question. The professor marched back and forth in front of the chalkboard, staring at us with an eerie grin, like a hyena trapping its prey. Now, having discussed nerve endings and tendons, he began, I did not remember discussing such things, having only been there since several minutes ago. You will answer me this. The professor pointed his baton at a sketch of a skeletal thumb and gave a fakey Girl Scout smile. What is a hand? He cheered through his teeth. The children stared absently. The little boy who liked to play with fungus picked his nose. How could they not know what a hand is? I scratched my leg and surveyed the children, completely mystified. Everyone knows what a hand is. The teacher's laser gaze gnawed through the crowd. He stepped forward. What is a hand? He asked again, straining the sides of his mouth from stretching them so far. A beautiful little girl's hand shot up. The professor shot her a look, then stepped back and gave a deep, flowery chuckle. Very funny, Sally. An excellent example. Now, class, you may define a hand for me. Sally's hand plummeted. The class gave blank stares. In what absurd sort of classroom setting is one to refrain from raising her hand? I did not dare to ask the professor this question either. Frankly, I preferred to refrain from asking him anything at all. Silence. The professor swam through us like a fat, merry shark ready to snatch up more prey. In passing, he tapped a girl on the legs with his baton. She instantly straightened her posture. He was coming my way. I was ready. John. I stood up straight and turned to face the man's navel. I was not fond of his sight. Tell the class, John, what is a hand? I looked up at the professor and I saw the first genuine smile I'd seen that day. I stepped up to the blackboard and planted my hands firmly on my hips. I looked out to see several bright, admiring gazes. I suppose this was the perspective of a teacher. This made me wonder how any teacher who got to see such a sight every morning could possibly be such an insufferable bitch. A hand? I began and then stopped. My mouth hung open in mid-sentence. What is a hand? Such a simple question, but no simple answer. My mind began to race as I broke out in a sweat. What is a hand? Can I just say it's an appendage? No, that's too broad. Feet and arms are appendages too. The professor's smile twisted into a sneer. I shut my eyes. What is a hand? It's 5 appendages attached to something, but what do I call the middle thing? A palm? Isn't it pretty dumb to define a hand in terms of a palm, which is itself defined in terms of a hand? I heard mirthful, high-pitched laughter echo around me. My head started to spin. I heard a train horn. I woke with a start and stared at the ceiling. My pillow was hot and gross, so I turned it over. Have you ever had a dream where you have to do something and you wake up without being able to finish? At first you're thinking to yourself that you couldn't complete your task and now something terrible will happen to you. But you realize that nothing terrible can happen to you because you never really had to complete the task in the first place. You were just dreaming you did. That reasonably approximates the thought process I went through in that moment. Daddy, what's wrong? I looked up at the brown-haired little girl who stood over my bed. Sally, my daughter. What a sweet smile. What a precious, innocent, delectable smile. Sally pouted. I heard a big noise. I rubbed my eyes and yawned. Everything is fine, sweetie. Go back to bed, okay? She nodded and skipped away, swinging her teddy bear as she went. I looked over my nightstand to my photo of her. I caressed it. What a darling child. I worked my eyes down her body and paused. Hands? I shook my head. I thought for some reason she had been wearing a dress made of hands. No, it was just her favorite fairy princess outfit as usual. I put the photo back on the nightstand. I sighed, laid my head back down, and closed my eyes. Cold, white, snow. I crawled through the sparkling void, trying to work out left from right. I looked around for something to relate myself to, a tree or some footprints to judge my position in space. Nothing. I crawled forward without aim, headed toward the soothing sounds of a violin. The icy snow under my hands and knees began to feel softer and wetter as I continued on my way. I thought I saw a slight hint of red, ever so faint, glowing across the flakes like butter on mashed potatoes. The violin grew louder, ripping furiously across scales that transcended my very ears. The red oozed in, ever more prominent, violating my eyes like the glare of fresh sun. I started to sweat. An opening ahead. A cave? I crawled faster, had to escape the heat, had to escape this dreadful, noisy light. Time for shade, for darkness, for sleep. The snow started to give away, caving under its weight. I tried to pull my hand out, but the ravenous hole tugged and slurped and gnashed its snowflakey teeth. I cried out for help, but my cries fell under the white silence of snow. I struggled, desperate. The snow wasn't cold anymore. I gleamed with a sickly warmth, damp and gooey as it slurped at my face. I tried to scream, but my mouth filled with bright red snow. I tasted blood. I struggled to turn my head toward my body. No flailing arms or kicking legs. No writhing and wrenching abdomen greeted my eyes, just hands. Swarms and swarms of disembodied hands, spurting blood at the wrists as they clawed and jabbed at the snow. One of the hands opened up to reveal a single dead, baggy eye at the center of its palm. It looked at me. The hands all stopped and began to turn toward my face, fingers eagerly crickling and popping. The snow shifted. I tumbled helplessly down the drain. The hands followed, beginning to melt, skin first, then flesh, and at last bone and marrow. I rolled out into the open along with several pounds of snow. I was happy to see it had resumed being white and cold as per usual. I looked around. A cave, an old cave from the looks of it, full of vines and plants. There seemed to be some statues as well, monuments resembling gargoyles, carved drawings on the walls that seemed to depict nothing in particular. I panted. I could see my breath. I hung my head and breathed a sigh of relief. I opened my eyes. The snow under my feet had begun to move, forming a pattern. I, B, R, U, N. I looked behind me and saw a large striped paw emerging from the hole in the wall, outfitted with fierce claws. It groped around, rumbling. The wall began to crack. I stole another glance at the snow on the ground. I didn't need to be told twice. Scarcely could I finish climbing to my knees before my feet flew like the wind, nearly tripping me as I tore away from my imminent fate. Daring to look back, I watched the huge Bengal tiger burst forth from the stone wall and lick its chops. I didn't need to watch any longer to know it was coming after me. I continued screaming and running for my life for what seemed like hours, the tiger close behind all the while, its paws thumping against the tunnel ground. I eventually ran out of breath to yell and just gasped and panted as I ran. A dead end fast approached. My bacon was cooked. The wall at the end started to get brighter. The ancient ruins were scrambled, but I could just barely make them out. What is a hand? I started to run out of room. I stopped myself before running into the wall. I inched up against it, the space between the tiger's jaws and my relatively tiny human head becoming smaller and smaller. I could feel its breath on my face. It smelled like rotten meat. The tiger licked its chops again. I shrunk down and cowered in the corner, shaking. It roared. I woke with a start and stared at the ceiling. I turned my head down to see a precious little girl standing over my bed. "Daddy, what's wrong?" she pouted. "I heard a big noise." I rubbed my eyes and yawned. "Everything is fine, sweetie. Go back to bed, okay?" She nodded and skipped away, swinging her teddy bear as she went. I turned to the nightstand and removed the PCP syringe from its case. The doctor said I need angel dust to sleep. It sounded like bullshit, but it seemed to work pretty well. I hastily put the needle back as I saw Sally stop dead in her tracks. The teddy bear dropped to the floor. I shook my head and blinked. "Sweetheart?" "I almost forgot." She giggled and turned back to face me. "Daddy, can you help me with my homework?" She bounced back to my bedside and looked up at me with her bright hazel eyes. I smiled in a way that I hope seemed sufficiently paternal. "Well, of course I can, but then it's time for bed." I lifted her up under her arms, kissed her nose, and sat her down next to me. "Now what are we looking at here?" Sally eagerly pressed the open book into my face. I plucked the book from her little paws and took a look for her. "The body, huh? I was never too good at this class when I was a kid." "You were a kid?" She stared at me wide-eyed, her fascination plainly obvious. I chuckled. "Everyone's a kid at some point, even your daddy." I read through the questions and her answers. "Let's see. Can you look your elbow? What is puberty? And when does it happen?" I stopped. "What is a hand?" I dropped the book in my lap, shaking. "What's wrong, Daddy?" I looked down at Sally, half her face rotting away, her wrinkled eyeball dangling from its socket. "Aren't my answers good?" I felt my eye twitch, static, hands crawling all over my beautiful daughter. Their fingernails sunk into her delicate flesh and clawed at it, desperate, hungry. "Don't you love me, Daddy?" She took my hand and drew it closer to her body. Her intestines chomped through her flesh like piranhas and started to crawl on her silky skin. Tiny dark holes like the gaps between spider's threads festered open all over her cheeks. Her hanging eyes struggled to rise up and look at me. "Aren't I a pretty girl?" My hand drew closer to the festering, rotting mess that sat beside me. I felt an erection thump in my pants. I blacked out. A hand is what bullies use to push people down the stairs. A hand is what men used long ago to reap the land barren and establish buildings upon its surface. A hand is an instrument of defacement. I found myself standing in the center of a shipwreck. The wood was moist and rich with mold and fungus. I saw my little Sally on her hands and knees inspecting the rotten wood. She tore off a chunk and flew it around her head like an airplane. I turned my attention to the blackboard. Amidst the sketches of whale skeletons and nerve paths, I saw a name written in small bold letters, Professor Stan. I dusted my flamboyant clothing and added in an A between the S and the T. I set down the chalk and turned to face my bright, happy class. My friend Caleb. Friends are really important people. They can help you in a loss of a loved one, make you laugh at your darkest moments, and stand up for you. Most of us end up making our friends in school. As for me, I was never too much of a social butterfly, so it took me up into high school to finally make some friends. Of course, since I was so reluctant to meet anyone for so long, I wasn't considered popular, but who even wants to be popular? After all, you're only in high school for a couple years of your life, and then you are gone, most likely never seeing those people ever again. Then again, there's always that inner thirst for attention that is so strong in certain people. My friend Caleb had that inner thirst. Caleb was a wealthy kid who had a good home life. His parents were still together, he was an only child, and he even had his own cell phone, TV, and computer, which at the time was sort of a rarity. But Caleb hungered to be popular. Even though he never said it out loud, I could see it in his eyes, the way he looked at the popular kids strutting down the hall with a big crowd around them. Who could blame him? Caleb had sometimes told me that one day he and I would be popular and all the people in school would bow before us. I laughed and shrugged it off, of course. After all, Caleb joked around a lot and had quite an imagination. It was around the time of 10th grade when I noticed changes in Caleb. He started to hang out with our group less and less, scribble stuff down in a journal, and spend most of his time at his house. Around this time, YouTube also started to get popular, so I didn't have much time to ask him about it as I was regularly waiting to see what the world had to share next. Anyway, Caleb and I were best friends. I'm pretty sure we were closer with each other than anyone else in the group. Before we started to become so antisocial, we would hang around each other a lot of the time. Once, Caleb even almost got his classes switched so we could have the same schedule. But two boys hanging out all the time also meant we were the butt of many gay jokes. It didn't help that both of our names happened to particularly rhyme with said word, my name being Raymond, and you already know his name. So, we had arguably the worst nicknames in the whole school. This really bothered Caleb, but I didn't take too much offense to it since I knew that the important thing to focus on in school was education. But being the good friend I was always sure to calm Caleb down after one of the names was shot at us. One day I will never forget is when the facts started happening. The internet is full of facts and myths, and Caleb sure liked his facts. However, he never got normal facts such as, did you know that there's a mushroom species named after SpongeBob? Or, did you know an adult dog has 42 teeth? No. He had an interest in serial killer facts. It was always one a day and obviously disturbing for my friends and me. We didn't take action for a while until a couple months later when he started doing 5 facts a day. While it might not seem like too much, you have to remember, we just went through 1 murderous fact a day for over 3 months, and now it was going to 5. We all had a meeting at my friend Sky's house to discuss Caleb's behavior. Sky himself suggested that maybe Caleb was starting to become goth/emo, since that was the new popular thing at the time. We all considered it, but it was ultimately shut down since Caleb still had his normal clothes and hair. If he was truly goth or emo, he would have most likely dyed his hair black by now, or at least wear black clothes more often. My other friend Jackson suggested that maybe this was all a stunt to get attention. Caleb did love attention, and it would make sense for him to go in this deep if it meant he might even get a shimmering glimpse of popularity. I was feeling rather sick, so I decided to leave the meeting early, as it was going to be a sleepover meeting. My friends waved me goodbye as I started walking home. My parents weren't home as they were going on a business trip, and I wasn't sure if my younger sister was even home, seeing as she had some kind of party with her friend. Either way, it was just me alone walking home. I remember it being around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and it was especially cold. I shuddered as I hugged my light jacket closer to my body, the streetlights being my only guide to my house. As I trudged through the coldness, I saw another figure walking on the opposite side of the street. I started to gain pace when I passed the figure. I've seen movies where the figure jumps out and kills you. At the time, I should have known that the event of that actually happening was very slim, but I was still a dumb teenager at the time. Of course, my imagination was just being overactive. The shadowy figure was soon gone, and I was left alone again. I laughed at how silly I was for actually thinking that something, was going to attack me until the figure came back. No, I wasn't running. It just must have turned around and went back. I could see it out of the corner of my eye, but I didn't want to stare. Then I saw the figure start to jog, so I went into a sprint. The figure was close behind and was calling my name. Raymond, it called. Raymond, wait up! The fact that the shadow even knew my name was enough to get me running for my life. However, as I ran, I noticed the voice sounded familiar. Just as it caught up to me, I realized who it was. I stopped and uttered one word. Caleb? The figure nodded and stopped right in front of me. Raymond, he said. I know about the secret meeting you had. Crap, I thought as he stared at me in disbelief. I had a thought that maybe he was just lying. Another one of his jokes, I laughed. Yep, and then we totally TP'd the principal's house, I said in a sarcastic tone. Caleb just looked at me with a serious face. I wasn't joking. I know about the meeting. Sky, Jackson, Albert, Alan, and Sam were there. I sighed and decided to face the consequences. Fine, we had a meeting. The only reason you weren't invited is because, well, it was about you. Caleb's serious face turned into one of shock. Don't worry, though, I started. We were just worried about your health. You've been acting pretty strange as of late. All these murder facts and all. I didn't want any more questions, so I ended mine with a question I had been dying to ask. How did you know we were having a meeting? Caleb simply chuckled lightly and replied, I called your house and you weren't there. Then he walked off. I was still confused. Then I realized he implied I had no social life outside of our gang. I growled a little and continued on my way home. What Caleb didn't know was that comment inspired me to start to change my life. I became more social, went out more, and even got a girlfriend. No, I wasn't popular, nor did I want to be, but this was enough for me. People at least knew my name now. As for Caleb, all my new friends seemed to make him very jealous. This jealous behavior peaked when I told Caleb about my girlfriend, Laura. I didn't understand why he was acting so jealous. I still made time to be with the group. He was still my best friend, and the only nights I weren't around were Wednesdays, debate club meetings. Life was great at the time, but little did I know my world was about to change forever. I encouraged Caleb to join some more clubs so maybe he could make more friends and possibly even be popular. He couldn't join the football club since the season already started, but the next most popular club was the hunting club, which accepted newcomers almost any time. Over the months, I didn't see Caleb too often. Whenever I tried to call Caleb, using my house phone, we weren't all rich, he just replied that he was busy with hunting club. I just shrugged it off and accepted the fact that my best friend was lost to the hunting club. Aren't you supposed to lose at least one friend in high school? Well, my life was going extremely well. I managed to stay out of the high school spotlight. I had a loving girlfriend, and my friends and I, excluding Caleb, were about to get a new video game we all pitched in for. However, there was the sad feeling of losing Caleb lodged in the back of my mind. Yes, I knew it was normal to lose a friend one way or another, but I never actually dealt with it. Knowing something and dealing with something are two different things after all. They say before something life-changing happens, you remember everything that happened before it. For example, my friend Sam said that his aunt was eating a donut when JFK was assassinated. Well, it was March 13th when all hell broke loose. No one saw it coming, not even me. Caleb came in with 2 shotguns and began shooting people left and right. All of my new friends, even Laura, were gunned down. Some survived and others didn't. Teachers were scrambling to hide us, we were freaking out, and the bullets kept flying. And to think, the day started with my friends and I waiting eagerly for school to be out. And now the thought of a new video game was the last thing on my mind. My thoughts were crowded. People were screaming. Big bangs were going on and on. It was getting hard for me to concentrate, hard for me to even breathe. Caleb, my friend for 2 years, was killing people left and right. Not just any people. People who meant a lot to me. I was suddenly taken out of my thoughts when Caleb strutted over to me. Come on, he said in a raspy voice. Let's go. The police are going to be here soon, and if we leave now, we might be able to outrun them. I stared at him in confusion. You expect me to go with you? You sick bastard? You're seriously injured or even... I took a deep breath. Even killed some of my friends or people close to me. Why in the hell would I dare escape with you? I wasn't expecting an answer, but the one I got in response shocked me. Because I love you, Raymond. Ever since I saw you in 6th grade when I transferred here, you helped me come out of my shell and realize who I am. I looked disgusted at him. Not because of his attraction to me, but because he was willing to do this all because of me. I was the source of the issue. I feel bad for the LGBTQ community. People like Caleb are probably why they had such a bad rep. Either way, I took a deep breath. With a shaking voice, I told Caleb that he was sick and that I'd never loved someone like him. What happened next made me half wish I kept my mouth shut and half relieved that it was all over. Caleb took one of his guns and pointed it inside his mouth. Before I could try to stop him, he pulled the trigger and was gone. I collapsed on the floor weeping. I had just witnessed a school shooting. I had just witnessed people die and get seriously injured. I just watched my former best friend shoot himself. Caleb, the boy who could have everything he wanted except popularity and acceptance for his sexuality. 16 people were injured. 4 were killed, including Caleb. Sky, Alan, Laura, and Caleb all gone from this world. I soon learned that Caleb was scribbling his plans into his journal and he was kicked out of the hunting club for destroying a decoy. It then made sense to me that he had only joined that club so he could learn how to shoot and aim a gun. It's a shame what happened to Caleb, but at the same time, he was asking for it. There were many ways he could have dealt with his feelings and actions. He chose not to, and he chose to go through with the shooting. Later that week, the police came to my house to question me, and within a month, the community seemed to be over the shooting. I was more unpopular than ever at school, and people seemed to be afraid of me. Jackson, Albert, and Sam were all that was left of our original group. My other 13 friends didn't want to be around us after what happened. Jackson's legs ended up being mangled pretty badly, and he had to be put in a wheelchair. Albert was mostly fine, but was having trouble dealing with the death of his twin, Alan. Sam ended up having to get his arm amputated. I think the worst part of this all, though, was that it inspired more kids to shoot up more schools. Still today, the shootings aren't over, but it's over now where I live. Jackson, Albert, and Sam all ended up growing into fine, successful young men. The victims of the shooting ended up getting a fountain dedicated to them, even Caleb. I'm now married with 2 kids. I go around schools telling kids the tale of Caleb Marcus and warning them about the dangers of feeling left out and getting too attached to someone. Not a day goes by where I don't wonder how things could have went differently if I did something else. Hopefully, you learned something too about my ex-friend Caleb. And that is where we are going to end Time to Die Tuesdays. I hope you guys enjoyed these. If you did, please give me a like and give me a roar down in the comments for some more. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.